Hi, everyone. Welcome to our workshop this evening, Staying Safe from Predators Online, What Autism Parents and Teens on the Spectrum Need to Know. We are so fortunate to have Andolyn Medina here. She is a 24-year-old naval officer, currently in her third year of her doctoral degree. Yes, you read that right. She's 24 and in her third year of her doctoral degree in clinical psychology at George Washington University. In 2017, Andolyn graduated with her MA in forensic psychology, summa cum laude, and will receive her second MA in clinical psychology in August of 2020. In addition to being a full-time student, Andolyn is currently seeing patients via teletherapy. She's committed to combating human trafficking while promoting, educating, and bringing awareness to this billion-dollar industry to schools, businesses, administrators, law enforcement, and parents. She is currently a volunteer with FAIR, Free, Aspire, Inspire, and Restore Girls, where she conducts presentations, webinars, training, and provides resources to victims. She's actively involved with national organizations such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the National Center for Victims of Crime, as well as the Georgia-based national initiative Demand an End. She's an active member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Inc. and enjoys reading, traveling, and spending time with her super cute puppy. I've seen pictures, super adorable, Knowles, who is named after Beyonce. So Andolyn, thank you so much for coming, and I will cede the floor to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Hallie. For those of you all that are here or just joining, I'll just restate again. I can only see a couple of the screens, but please feel free to visit canva.live and enter that code if there's any questions that you have while I'm getting started. If it's something that I can answer, in real time, I will. If it's something that I think we'll get to, I'll just sort of let it sit there and sort of address it when we get there. And if not, I'll save it to the end so that we can have a larger discussion about it. Also, if we are in person, I would really love to know who you all are as well. So if you can feel free to put in the chat, either on Skype or via the canva.live thing. That'll be the easiest thing for me, since right now with screen sharing, I can just see what I have sort of up. That'll be the best thing, just so I can get a sort of idea of who's here, who's in the audience. But thank you all for joining us. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. As Hallie stated, I interned at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and often was tasked with calling parents and siblings of missing kids. And that's what sort of alerted me to this widespread issue. And so I'm excited to share this with you all today, and excited to answer any of your questions. So that being said, we'll get started. So of course, as you all know, we're going to be talking about staying safe from predators online, what autism parents and teens on the spectrum need to know. So human trafficking one-on-one. Human trafficking is believed to be the third most prevalent criminal activity in the world. In the United States, people are bought, sold, and smuggled like modern-day slaves. Human trafficking victims can be beaten, starved, deceived, and forced into sex work or agricultural, domestic, restaurant, or factory jobs with little to no pay. Many Americans unknowingly encounter trafficking victims throughout their daily activities. Trafficking victims and traffickers come from all walks of life. They've been recovered from rural areas, small towns, the suburbs, and large cities. In addition, a trafficker could be anyone. And I think that this is important because a lot of times we talk to kids about stranger danger, or at least probably when Hallie and I were growing up, there was a conversation around, a white van, but it could be anybody. It could be a classmate, an employer, a family friend, a family member, an acquaintance, a boyfriend or girlfriend, or someone you did meet online. Traffickers often pretend to be someone they are not by setting up fake accounts online to friend a teenager and then groom them using a variety of techniques to gain their trust, which we will later touch on. And so this is the federal definition of human trafficking one-on-one that I wanted to give you all as sort of our working definition. So often we only hear about sex trafficking, and I think that that's the one that catches the most media attention or widespread attention. But there's also labor trafficking here as well. And so I have these two federal definitions as well for you all to sort of glance at. But sex trafficking is the act or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another for the purpose of sexual exploitation through force, fraud, or coercion. Labor trafficking is the act of which individuals perform labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. The difference between the two is sex is involved in sex trafficking. And I think that this is sort of important because while they could have their separate sort of areas, as I just stated, you can see labor trafficking bridge into sex trafficking. So, for an example, within my field, I did a U visa, an assessment for a woman that was of Mexican descent, 50 years old, and was brought to the United States under the guise that she would be working here and that she would eventually be able to have a pathway to citizenship. However, when she came to the States, she was forced into beyond harsh labor conditions that were not what she was sort of told up front. She was not given a pathway to citizenship. And because she did not have that pathway, they were able to sort of coerce her and force her to do things that she didn't necessarily want to do. And so that did eventually lead into sex trafficking as well, with not only the employers but their friends. And I think that that story is important to highlight because while our focus today is on children, it's important that we see globally how pervasive this is and how many different people from all walks of life, ages, ethnicities, gender, and sexual expressions can be impacted by trafficking. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to say. Oh, I did want to draw attention to the end of the definition on sex trafficking, where it says that a person has not attained 18 years of age. And so that's important because I think in a lot of societies, as I just stated, there's this idea that it has to happen as a child and that there's no excuse if it happens when you're older than 18. When we see that there's a lot of loopholes and a lot of reasons when somebody can tell what your vulnerabilities are, that they could continue to exploit that past the age of 18, as I just stated. Sorry about that. Okay. So 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally. These are the stats that we have right now, but of course we know that this number is probably a lot larger than that by the sense that it's really difficult to track. So some other stats that are just important to know. More than 25% of those victims are children, which would break down to an alarming 10 million of kids, and 3/4 of those children are from at-risk groups. Since 2007, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has received reports of 22,191 sex trafficking cases in the United States, which is also important because I think we've always thought about this issue as being something that happens everywhere else but here, when in all actuality, it's happening in our backyards. Additionally, in 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimated that 1 in 6 endangered runaways were likely sex trafficking victims. And the International Labor Organization estimated that there are 4.5 million people trapped in forced sexual exploitation around the world. Sex trafficking is a lucrative industry and it makes an estimated $99 billion a year. It is one of, as I stated earlier, the fastest criminal industries that we have. And I wonder if we can think about that maybe at the end. So the AMP model is very important. And if you guys are taking notes, this is something that we're going to come back to later with case examples. So the AMP model is a tool designed by the Polaris Project, and it helps you determine whether a person is a victim survivor of human trafficking. So human trafficking, again, occurs when a perpetrator, often referred to as a trafficker, takes any one of the enumerated actions, so induce, recruit, harbor, transport, provide, or obtain, and then employs the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of compelling the victim to provide commercial sex acts, labors, or services. At a minimum, one element from each column must be present to establish a potential situation of human trafficking, except in cases when a minor is induced into commercial sex, in which case just the act alone of them being a minor is considered to be sex trafficking. And so, again, I think definitions are really important. So, force would be considered physical action to prevent a victim from leaving or making them feel like they can't leave. Fraud would be any personal misrepresentation of a situation. And coercion would be anything that creates a climate of fear. So, with the example that I just shared of the 50-year-old woman, you could see coercion in the sense that they told her if she didn't do what they would say, they would sort of give her to authorities, let them know she was in the United States illegally. Fraud, they misrepresented the circumstances in which she would be coming to the United States. Otherwise, you could imagine she would not go. And they exploited her knowing that her family needed her back in Mexico. So she really did need the money. And then force, again, it can't be consensual when you are being coerced or when activities are fraudulent. So more specifically, and why we're here today, what does this mean for our youth with autism? Sadly, we've known for decades that people with disabilities are more vulnerable to violent crime, and research supports this. A 2015 report article noted that people with disabilities make up only 14% of the American population, and yet they account for 21% of all victims of crime. So we must protect this population while empowering them to protect themselves. And I want to also widen this because I will reference at-risk groups or at-risk populations several times. And so again, to define it, we can think of children in the foster care system, children that have ran away, children that are homeless, drug abusers, abuse or neglect victims, folks with lower self-esteem or children of addicts, as well as any children with any sort of disability or mental health concern. And also you can think about the ways that many of the things that I just listed can also intersect. And so it is possible that a child can have more than one of those identities, which would place them further at risk. So let's talk about what these vulnerabilities are. If we narrow the data to sex crimes, you find that children and youth with intellectual disabilities are at a higher risk for sexual abuse and assault than their peers. And now there is evidence that that paradigm can extend into the human trafficking world. So Dr. Joan Reed of the University of South Florida cited a study that revealed that of 54 reviewed sex trafficking cases in Florida between 2007 and 2014, 1/3 of those cases involved girls with intellectual disabilities. And so I would like to open the floor up for a little bit to see if anybody has any thoughts on why these 4 bullet points here would be something to consider of vulnerabilities. And
Well, I
again,
think on the isolation bullet point, I'll chime in and kind of open the floor. I think on the isolation bullet point, a lot of times, especially young women with autism, feel socially isolated and may not be included in their peer groups. And so they reach out online. And one thing we've actually noticed at the Richmond Autism Integration Network, now that it's so easy to reach out to people online, a lot of kids with autism rely on the web essentially as their social network. So kind of over reliance on the web and not really being aware of the dangers that are online.
100%. Thank you, Hallie. Does anybody else have any other ideas? Maybe one more, 2 more people? And there's no wrong answers, I should add.
I
Hi.
Hi. I would think communication, which I would think will align pretty much into what Hallie just stated for its isolation. If they remove you from your friend, family, people that you're comfortable with, then you might be least likely feel comfortable communicating, sharing. And then the other aspect of communication is with those kids who have disabilities. Maybe they're not as articulate, or maybe they believe someone will not believe what they are sharing about their abuse.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll go into more details and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, of course, at the end. I do want to make this as collaborative as possible. So let's start with reliance on caregivers. So children often rely on caregivers to meet their basic needs. They may be submissive to their caregivers because they're dependent on them, and this creates a power dynamic in the relationship in which the child then becomes easily exploitable, and the person can force them or guilt them into trafficking in sort of exchange for disability benefits, supplemental security income, or the Social Security disability insurance. And so there'll be an example of that later on, but that is also something to think about, especially if you also think about the intersection between that and drug or any sort of addiction. Where isolation comes up is very similar to what Hallie was stating. Um, Folks can often feel very isolated, and this can cause them to crave attention or human connection. They may be persuaded to do sex acts or labor as a result. Additionally, they may not have the opportunity to report abuse or to ask for help due to this isolation if it doesn't feel like they would be believed. Thirdly, and I think that this one is truly very important to me, and a larger conversation we need to be having, is about physical boundaries. So, due to the touching that comes with intimate care and medical procedures, people may be desensitized to touch or may not know when they can say no. They may lack the information about what is okay and what is not okay touching, or lack of information about their sexual or reproductive health. I go into detail with my friends and my family members, but it's important to make sure that kids are educated on sex education and that it's never too early to start so that they can be aware of what is happening. In the past 4 years, I've seen more information on an increase in sexual abuse towards children with special needs, specifically due to parents not teaching the difference between appropriate and inappropriate touching, appropriate relationships, and sex education. This is not about parents necessarily being naive, but it more so about thinking that the children and the teens would understand the information that they receive from school, TV, and peers as must do, thus leaving them more vulnerable for sexual victimization. Because you have to think, many kids, if they don't get that conversation from their parents, they're more than likely learning it from TV or their peers who don't know. They're not the most reliable sources or the most educational or informational sources. So you want to make sure that you are having that conversation explicitly with your kids and empowering them to be able to say no, even if they're as little as 1 or 2 and they don't want to hug someone. It's important to say, like, that's okay. And build it there. And that's where you can sort of teach early conversations regarding consent. And lastly, communication. Um, so some kids may feel nervous about speaking up, and they may struggle with speaking clearly or require interpretation to make their needs known or to ask for help. And as we know, with autism and with several other mental health concerns in general, everything lies on a spectrum, and so it's important to be cognizant of that and respectful of that. Um, Students may also not know their individual rights and may feel like they won't be believed if they report it. Therefore, it is important to teach them again about healthy relationships and boundaries. Good touch versus bad touch can be uncomfortable but necessary. Additionally, children and adults on the autism spectrum are often very trusting of friendly people and cannot always sense danger and also cannot always sense motivations. Talk to them about human trafficking, what it means, and who to trust if they do feel pressured or threatened in any sort of way. So if we do have any parents, if we do have any teachers on the call right now, I would say, make sure you do have that conversation with your kids so that they explicitly know if something happens, you are a safe space, you are a confidant where they can process that and that there's no shame in it. So human trafficking and the internet, which I could go into this for days, but I will try to keep it short and sweet. So with the growth of technology, the use of social media, the buying and selling of human beings has become as easy as a simple click on the keyboard. So Backpage is like adjacent to a Craigslist. And so on this website, people could purchase men, women, and children and use their sexual acts as the product that they were selling. These websites made it easier than ever for traffickers to find victims and made forms of payment for this nearly untraceable. This poses a tremendous concern because victims were then trafficked without a way to see who were paying for the services, and further, then that makes it difficult to know how to enforce or how to charge these criminals for these acts. In addition, traffickers were then able to friend and follow potential victims through various apps, and traffickers then use social media as platforms to reach potential victims on a larger scale. So it is important to note that Backpage has been shut down, and that's great. Our Congress was able to do that. However, one of the downsides and the controversies of that is that Backpage was at least the devil that you knew. Whereas now that Backpage is gone, you can sort of imagine that there has been several more sort of black market pages that have erupted from this. Additionally, when we talk about social media, online recruitment has existed for as long as there has been a widespread access to internet platforms. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has noted a widespread of recruitment on social media platforms, including but not limited to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Kik, Meet Me, WhatsApp, dating sites like Tinder, Grindr, and Plenty of Fish. Traffickers may build an intimate relationship with the victim through social media or advertise fake or deceptive job opportunities. Recruiters of traveling sales crews even post brazen photos of daily cash profits to entice potential victims, and agricultural labor recruits may advertise for U.S. visa contracts as well via social media. So one of the simple ways I've seen this pop up is people offering folks modeling gigs on Instagram, or trying to say that they would like them to be an influencer or a brand ambassador for their organization. Sometimes real, sometimes not at all. So again, important to have somebody that you trust to talk about that with. Additionally, I had a family friend that loves TikTok. She was about 13 at the time. And somebody tried to entice her by saying that they really loved her TikToks, that they wanted to make a video with her, that they wanted to meet up with her. So these are, again, the ways that you sort of see on the surface. This feels really simple, but you can see when you are dealing with the kid how this could easily entice them, and how it feels very innocent to them, so that they therefore don't tell you, or they just sort of go off on these excursions. So again, one of the things that my mom used to do with me is she had all of the passwords to all of my social medias. And while I thought that it was very extreme at the time, I'm now very thankful for it. So you definitely do want to be involved and engaged in what is happening on your child's phone. Additionally, the last one is a lot of traffickers like to give their victims new devices, new cell phones, new computers, you name it. And that is because then if you do have access to their cell phone, you could take their cell phone, but the trafficker would still have access to the student. So you also want to pay attention to what your kid has. If you see your kid with a bunch of new clothes that you did not buy them, if you see them all of a sudden having technology devices that they didn't have before, or money they didn't have before, those are all red flags to sort of be concerned and open your eyes to maybe what's going on here. Where is the money coming from? So I did want to bring this up briefly because I do think that it's important, especially I've seen a lot of conversation now about human trafficking, and it can be very overwhelming and scary, but I also wanted to let everyone know that you're not alone in this fight, that there are these huge private industries that are trying to help. So December 2011, Google made several grants totaling 11.5 million to anti-human trafficking organizations to support new initiatives utilizing technology. These technology-focused initiatives include projects with Polaris Project, Slavery Footprint, and the International Justice Mission. June 2012, Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit and Research awarded a total of $185,000 to 6 research teams studying a wide variety of issues related to disrupting technology-facilitated sex trafficking and improving services to victims. LexisNexis also engaged with this through creating a national database of social service providers, an online resource center for attorneys who work with human trafficking victims, a training institute established with the American Bar Association on civil remedies for victims, and a human trafficking index to track trafficking news articles produced by 6,000 news sources in more than 120 countries. JP Morgan Chase has developed tools for applying anti-money laundering protocols to human trafficking in order for us to track where the money is going. So one such investigation of several credit card transactions at a nail salon during non-business hours uncovered a human trafficking operation. Software company Palantir, I believe that's how you say it, Technologies, has worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to improve NCMEC's ability to process and make sense of all the data. The resulting data and analysis can be a valuable assistance to law enforcement and others engaged in the efforts to combat trafficking. And it's important to note that before NCMEC was founded, it was easier to find a missing car than it was to find a missing child. And that's because we had no database at the time to be able to locate any children or to be able to communicate across the United States to find out where they were. And I think that that's extremely troubling, but shows just how far we've come and sort of our understanding of what's happening. So these are some tips for the internet that I will let you all sift through. Protecting children from trafficking means protecting them from predators who attempt to lure victims through online access, chat rooms, and social media. Know which social media accounts your child is using. Insist on access to those accounts and passwords. Be friend with your child on social media in order to understand what they may be seeing and doing online. Set up guidelines for online access and safety, and use internet filters to prevent them from access to pornographic or any other harmful websites. As addition, I thought this was a really great quote from a licensed social worker and crime victim advocate. She stated, as parents, the best way we can prevent victimization is to talk to our kids, know where they are going, find out who their friends are, and check up on them. If they aren't comfortable talking to you, have another adult mentor available for them to connect with. It is also crucial to know what your child is doing on the internet at all ages and to limit this accessibility. There are so many apps, ways to hide history, create dummy accounts, and have access at all hours. If the internet settings are confusing to you, take them to an electronic phone store and have them assist you in setting parameters you are comfortable with. So we have a question. I'm just going to briefly check. You're on social media. This is open and ready. How safe are these games? Okay. So very true. As it relates to maybe more like unitary games where the kid is like only playing it by themselves, nobody else, I would say that's fairly fine. But you could see some of that same sort of interaction on, you know, any sort of like game like Fortnite or NBA 2K, any of the like big video games where they can sort of talk to people all around the world. I would say that is completely fair game for any of those conversations to happen, in which, you know, if your kid is playing them all hours of the night and you can sort of imagine someone messaging them, getting close to them through playing those games, talking to them, and all of a sudden information starts to come out that your kid may not be aware of is like private information or things that could be used against them. All of that I would say is fair game, unfortunately, for a trafficker to sort of use that as a way to get in into bridge. And that brings me to another point. I think when we're talking about this, we often think about it being solely girls that are at risk, when it is fair game. And when we do know that the numbers for boys are high, just as high as well. It's just that with boys, there tends to be a bit more of a stigma. And so the numbers that we actually see may not actually be representative of the population and how human trafficking affects them. So thank you. That was a great question. So what can you do? I'm going to start first with knowing the signs. While this is not an exhaustive list, here are some red flags that could alert you to a potential trafficking situation that could be reported. You could notice somebody that lives with their employer. Someone has poor living conditions. Multiple people in a cramped space. Inability to speak to an individual alone. Their answers appear to be scripted and rehearsed. The employer is holding identity documents. There are signs of physical abuse. The person is submissive or fearful. Additionally, they may be unpaid or paid very little. or if they're under 18 and you notice that there are things happening in their life that they're being involved in sexual acts at an early age. Assuming you do have the opportunity to speak to a potential victim privately and without jeopardizing their safety, here are some sample questions you could ask to follow up on the red flags you're seeing. Can you leave your job if you wanted to? Can you come and go as you please? Have you been hurt or threatened if you tried to leave? Has your family been threatened? Do you live with your employer? Where do you sleep or eat? Are you in debt to your employer? Do you have your passport identification, or who has it? In addition, because my background is mental health, I think it's also important to think about the mental health signs that you would see, especially as a parent or a teacher. You could notice depression, hopelessness, feelings of sadness and unhappiness, sudden or inexplicable crying, a fear of being alone, a distrust and fear of strangers, a loss of interest in things and or an inability to plan for the future, recurrent or intrusive memories of abuse, stress-related disorders, avoidance, disorientation, confusion, anxiety, phobias, and or panic attacks, feeling inferior to others, feeling of being permanently damaged, fear of rejection. You could also notice sleeplessness, sleep disturbances, nightmares, and or insomnia. Sexual problems, including lack of sexual desire or the beginning of over-sexualized behaviors. You could see denial, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, anger, aggression, irritability, mood changes, changes in appetite or eating patterns, exhaustion, constant fatigue, isolating behavior, guilt, shame, or self-blame, numbness, somatization. So that means if all of a sudden they start saying that they are super sick, they have a tummy ache, but when you take them to the doctor's office, there's nothing really wrong. Hallucinations or delusions, obsessions and compulsions, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. And so I know that that was a lot listed, but if there are any questions about any specific ones, I'm happy to answer that and we can come back to that at the end. The other important thing to do is keep any documentation you have. So let's say there is a potential scenario or you think something may be happening that seems suspicious, screenshot it and screenshot text, photos, any of that to show law enforcement. And even if it doesn't feel like it's something that's happening to your child, or you feel like you're able to stop it before it does happen, it's still important to notify law enforcement, because you never know who else this person is in contact with or what other cases they may have open about this that could help. Additionally, I would say to also make sure that your kids are aware of this information. Kids can be the first line of defense for their friends. They see their friends, they can also see the mental health concerns in real time, and they also may be the first person that the friend really tells about what's happening. If they are able to see it, they're able to say something. And so that brings us to sort of the other points that I've covered. Advocating, it's really important to find out what your local city, what your state is doing, and talk to your legislators and government officials. The thing about human trafficking is, while it is illegal in all 50 states and nationally, we do not have any, I would say, national legislation that sort of induces that if somebody traffics in Florida, they get punished the same way that they would if it happens in Georgia. So what that means is that every state is operating under different laws, under different rules, and that could very much so vary what happens in said state. So you can imagine that if you are a trafficker and you know that, for instance, it's harsher. Okay, I'll use an example we could get. It is harsher to traffic in Virginia than it is to traffic in Washington, D.C. So a person that is going to traffic victims, if they were on the border, would perhaps do that in DC versus in Virginia, because they know that the crime, the punishment for that crime would be much more significant. And so what you want to talk to your legislatures about is making the crimes more harsh, making it more detrimental to that person, not only for the trafficker, but also for the person that is purchasing from said trafficker, because that is how this crime is continued to allow to continue to happen. And then also in several states, believe it or not, there's also a way in which they could punish the victims. And so you do want to look up your certain states to see what their laws are, and to also demand better from your legislatures. Additionally, important to educate and engage. So with the information that you have today, please share it with others around you and others in your community. It takes a village to be able to raise a child. I truly believe that. And so we can only demand an end to human trafficking if we know what it is, if we know the signs, and if we're able to speak up and speak out about it when we see it. So here are some lovely case examples that will lead us into our discussion. Well, I'm gonna come back to the slide actually. So I did want to share that these are some good films to watch. I Am Jane Doe, Tricked, and Rotten. There's also several more, but these are just some of the first three I've seen that I thought were really good to recommend. And then here are some additional resources. And again, I'll come back if anybody would like to show you those 2 slides. But really just wanted to get that out the way so we could have this larger discussion. And so if after I say, I have 3 stories. So after I state each case example, if you all could feel free to take off your mics and engage and ask any questions you have or any things that you would think about in regards to these cases, that would be great. So the question mainly is, can you spot the signs? What would you be curious about? What would you feel you need to know in order to say whether this was a human trafficking case or not? The first one is Allie. Allie is a 20-year-old girl with autism. She lives with her mother and siblings in a rural part of the state. Allie's mother collects her disability checks and benefits on her behalf. Neighbors complain that Allie's living conditions were terrible and that her mother has been offering to trade sex with Allie for money. Upon APS staff investigation, they determined that Allie never engaged in a commercial sex act, but that her mother did try to solicit buyers. They also learned that at night, Allie was locked in a shed outdoors and that she was required to conduct all housework and cleaning daily. So what do you all think, if this would be considered human trafficking or not, and what sort of things would you want to know? Do we have any takers? I can do the first one if you want me to model it. Okay. So some of the things that you would be curious about with Allie's case. So you certainly see that this is the reliance on caregivers example, in which her mom is exploiting her for these items. And so that would be the first thing to see, that is the action that is happening, that she's trying to make this happen. And although it doesn't follow through, so therefore it can't be considered, I guess, human trafficking, it would be something that you would have your eyes out, that you would not want Allie in that situation. You would try to see if she could get removed, just because you can see all of the components of a human sex trafficking case being there. So yes. So Michael is a 15-year-old teenager in Southwest Washington. He loves reading, anime, and online gaming, typical of many teenagers. Michael also has Asperger's syndrome and an anxiety disorder. So his parents were thrilled when he finally showed interest in interacting with friends online. He has always struggled with friendships, so his parents thought this was a great way to begin to interact safely and comfortably for him without the heavy expectation of social interaction that had always been difficult for Michael. He is just happy his parents are finally giving him some space and not always harassing him about going places and meeting new people. His online friends understand what a drag parents can be. One of them, Jason, even offered to let him move in so he could get away from his overbearing mom and dad. It's totally cool, he said. My parents said you could stay in our extra room. What concerns would you all have? I know there are parents up here.
I can go if nobody else wants to do this hypo, but I know there's some moms and dads here who I'm sure know a lot more about parenting than I do, because I just have a dog. So any volunteers?
I can go. I'll just do like two signs that I spotted.
Okay.
The friend asking to let him move in, and the fact that you can tell that he's, lonely, want friends. So just got to be careful with the fact that he's online gaming and interacting with these friends online.
Right.
He's vulnerable.
Yep. Would any of the other parents let Michael go stay with Jason? Maybe perhaps that is a better way. We can think about it. I'm imagining that it's a resounding, or okay, Susan, are you going to say something?
I was just going to say I would not, no.
And so that's sort of answering the anonymous question there is, just in these simple, innocent conversations that Michael is having, this friend, Jason, is able to exploit this vulnerability. And you can imagine how bad this situation could turn out if Michael's parents had no idea. As it says, they're just happy that he's talking to somebody. So if they had no idea what he was doing online, who he was talking to, and all of a sudden Michael goes missing, because his parents didn't have access to that, they would have no idea that he was talking to Jason. So that again highlights that, it's important. You can't be involved in every conversation your kid has, but it is important to try to have these open fields of communication as much as you can, because there could be so much that you're not aware of. So I think the last one is highlighting much of the similar sort of characteristics. And I'm cognizant of the time, so I would like to just open up the floor, and let the rest of the time till 7 be any questions that you all have. I'm happy to answer anything or just get your thoughts. Or if there's anything that you all have seen in your own communities, things that you're concerned about within your own kids, any of that is fine.
I have a question. So, how would you advise bridging this topic? Because it's kind of one of those topics. I know as somebody who worked as a camp counselor, it was awkward for me, and I'm sure it's even more awkward for families and parents. So,
Right.
how would you recommend bringing this up with your children in a way that it's not going to be, oh, my parents, want to monitor my video game conversations or they're trying to infringe on my privacy? How can they do it in a way to kind of help the child understand and help the child appreciate that there are real dangers online and they may not know best when it comes to people they've never met?
Right. Yeah, I think that it's definitely difficult and it's hard. And my mom is online too, so I'm sure she's gonna laugh at my advice to this, because I remember being a teenager and hating how much access she had to everything. But I think it's just in being honest about how real this is, and I think that a lot of kids actually know what's happening day to day. But I think it's being real and letting them know, sharing this PowerPoint, even if you want with them, but letting them know all of the dangers that are sort of outside of them, and that it's not necessarily about you wanting this information to spy on them or to invalidate them or to cross any boundaries with them. It's simply you wanting to be able to do your job as a parent to keep them safe and to sort of create some very hard rules that they may not like at the time, that they may not be excited or receptive to, but putting that hard foot down as a parent to say, like, no, this is what we're doing and this is for your safety. I think it's also in even talking to family members about it. So even if it's not you per se, as like I know family friends, you know I follow different family members' kids on social media, that I can have that conversation with their parents if I see something. It's finding and navigating little ways that even if it's not necessarily you that's on their social media, it's somebody that you trust very well, that you feel like you would be okay with them telling you anything that they saw on your kid's page, and that your kid would also maybe be receptive to them being and watching what's happening. Thank you, Ashley. Any other question? Any other parents that have had any difficult conversations with their kids? Or I know that another conversation that can often be difficult is even just talking to your kids about sex and about consent, or any boundaries. Has anybody been able to do that? Or is that also a question folks maybe are wondering too?
Well, hi. I've not experienced that directly, but I would recommend, as you said about someone else, a trusted friend or someone that you as the parent trust and they are on your kid's social media, you can even go further to say maybe they may not come back and tell the parent, but you know that you can trust them, that they can have the conversation with your child, and that child may receive it better coming from someone else than their parent.
Carla, did you have a question?
Hallie, I was just gonna, I've been listening. I'm a parent. My children are almost 40 years old, and no matter how old they are, you still worry about them. And the one piece of advice that I wish I would have followed more when I was younger and they were growing up is trust your instincts. Your instincts are usually 110% correct. And there was many times when I just didn't feel like the situation was right, and I would talk myself out of it, going, "Oh, Carla, you're overreacting," or something like that. Fortunately, it wasn't anything serious when they were growing up. They were typical kids. But that was also pre, social media. And I hear parents say things every once in a while, and I just want to go, does this make sense? And I ask them, I said, what is your instincts feel? What is your instincts telling you? They go, well, and I think that is your most valuable asset. And don't talk yourself out of it, because when there is a particular situation that might not be going right, I think your instincts kick in, especially as a parent. And if somebody would have asked my child to move in with them, every fiber of my being would be going, we need to work this out.
Right.
I don't need to send them away. This is something that I need to deal with. So that's my only piece. It's not, I think we underestimate our intuition. That's all.
I definitely agree. And I think part of what you're also bringing up is that, truth be told, it's parents' job to protect their kids. And that sometimes you might have to be the bad guy, but you have to trust your gut, and you have to sort of stick to that, and remember that, that at the end of the day, that's what you have to do,
Mm-hmm.
even if they do get mad at you for a little bit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. And
Thank
I
you.
can't imagine parenting right now with everything that's going on with the social, media, the isolation, and it's just tough for kids. My heart goes out to them, all kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add another thing that a family friend does is, she takes both of her kids' cell phones at 9 o'clock every night. So they're
Yeah.
are by her bedside, and that's a way that she sort of keeps track, keeps control. So again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Sometimes it is making a lot of hard rules, and you may not always be liked at the time, but it is certainly something that they could really appreciate you for, and something that you have to hope and pray that they never have to experience in any other way, in any other form.
Well, and I also think we underestimate the predators. I think most parents are good people and can't even comprehend what a predator may be thinking, or or carrying out. And I think that not knowing those things is very detrimental, because the predators now are so smart and they know how to get to the right kid at the right time. And I think, as you know, I think most of our population are good people, and they can't even comprehend the thoughts that may be going through a predator's mind. And I think that needs to be examined as well, so that you're prepared for the evil that you're facing. And I don't know how to do that. I mean, I don't have a solution for any of this. It's just things that I've observed and seen through the years.
Yeah, and your point makes me also think, again, it's also that no matter how great of a parent you are, or, even if you did all of these things, it's hard to say anything as 100% bulletproof. And so I also don't want anyone to take away from this that I'm blaming any parent of any child in any way, because it's ridiculously hard. And to your point, that's why it is important to think about the fact that traffickers can also be from all walks of life. I didn't put a movie there, but it is important, if you all haven't watched the Jeffrey Epstein on Netflix, please do watch it. You will get a sense of why this is a billion-dollar industry, how this is hiding right in front of our faces, just how pervasive this really is. There also was a story that I was at a gala last year, and a mother shared with us, Loudoun County, Virginia, well-to-do family from a good neighborhood. Everything you would think is fine. But her eldest daughter, met a boy at school, had a boyfriend. Parents met him, thought he was fine, thought he was great, did everything that they were supposed to do. Turned out, unbeknownst to them, he was a member of MS-13. He himself was perhaps good, but he was still in the gang and therefore had to do certain things in order to be a part of the gang. One of them being trafficking their daughter, to which he gave her to, the higher up, and they were able to do, you can imagine. And they continued to harass the family, followed her around school, were able to find her no matter where she went, no matter what the parents were able to do. Law enforcement was involved. Ultimately was the kid that came to them and told, there was a couple nights the daughter went missing, but it was ultimately her boyfriend that came to the parents and said, you need to get to her right now, otherwise she'll be gone in the next 24 hours, or she won't be okay, but you need to get to her. And that is ultimately how they were able to find their daughter. That's how they were able to get law enforcement, to get those group of people, and all of that. And so I don't want folks to think that there is one specific way that a trafficker can look. So again, it is important to trust your gut. It is important to try to open communication as much as you possibly can with your child, especially in the day and age. Social media can be bad. Social media can also be used for our benefit. You have on everybody's iPhone a way to track them with their location. So use that, turn your kids on, see where they are, know what's happening in their lives, and continue to open that communication as best as you can. And also being aware of the signs. I think that's a great help. So even if you don't know who all the traffickers are, if there's one thing it's your kid. And you can take comfort in being able to see in real time if your kid's not okay. And when you see that, you have to trust your gut. You have to ask those questions. You have to do everything in your power to be able to protect them. But that's one of the telltale signs, is your kid.
Mm-hmm.
So we're 1 minute till ending. I'm happy to take if there's any more questions, the last question anyone has. Other than that, I thank you all so much for joining us today. Please feel free to give Hallie any feedback that you have for me as well. I would greatly appreciate that. I want to continue to provide more webinars. So I would, greatly appreciate hearing from you all. But is there any last questions or any last remarks from anyone?
This is Susan. Thank you for doing this. We certainly appreciate it. And I would love to be able to have the recording. I know there were a couple of other moms that would have liked to have been here but couldn't. So if we could do that,
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, we will be
Thank you.
sending out the workshop via email. We also will be sharing it on our social media pages. So we encourage you, this is such an important topic, and we're so thankful that Andolyn graciously volunteered her time to come and chat with us. So we will be sharing this. Please spread it around your networks, take those steps to inform other parents. And thank you all so much for taking the time to come this evening. And Andolyn, thank you again. Big round of applause for our amazing presenter.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right, guys. And if you have any questions that you want to send to Andolyn, I'm happy to pass those along to her. And if you're interested in doing a workshop like this for another group you're in, she's incredible. She does offer these workshops. So I'm happy to send her contact information to anyone who might be interested in bringing a presentation like this to their community.
Yes, thank you so much, Hallie.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and end.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.